Hello everyone, it's me again, and today we'll be reacting to the Soda's Finest of Unlucky Tux Thomas, because I've been waiting for it so long. So I want to get a Thomas picture real quick. So you need it. I already have one. Alright, here we go.
I think all kids can take something away from. Never, ever give up on your goals. Keep trying, and you will achieve them. And it won't always be easy. You'll make mistakes, and it may take some self-reflection and self-discipline to get there. But if you persist, you will succeed, and you'll gain life experience from it. Its message is timeless, and I think that's why this is the most popular book of the franchise, and why Thomas himself quickly became the most popular character of the series. It's clear to see why. Thomas is very relatable to the target audience. Thomas is a small tank engine, and here he is positioned in a world surrounded by big, pompous tender engines that don't take him seriously. I think kids can relate to that. They see themselves in Thomas. They may not see themselves in, like, Edward because, well, they're not old like him. They may not see themselves in Gordon because, well, no kid wants to be the bully. They understand who these characters are, but who they see themselves as is Thomas. Kids all want to do big things, leave boring routine, be noticed by the adults, get the big reward for doing good, and ultimately have a big adventure. It's fantasy fulfillment for them. Thomas continued to be popular, and by the fourth book already came a sequel to his, Tank Engine, Thomas Again. Here we see what life on Thomas's branch line is like, and how things have changed for him. His coaches, Annie and Clarabelle, are properly introduced here, a push-pull set that Thomas runs backwards and forwards with. While they are old, Thomas loves them dearly, and is rather protective of them.
Thomas sings them little songs, and Annie and Clarabelle sing too. When Thomas starts from a station, he sings, "Oh, come along, we're rather late. Oh, come along, we're rather late." And the coaches sing, "We're coming along, we're coming along."
But even though Thomas has grown up a bit, he's still the same flawed, cheeky tank engine. Hitting a branch line gave him a sense of responsibility, which made him quite cocky.
Thomas the Tank Engine is very proud of his branch line. He thinks it is the most important part of the whole railway. How can I run my line properly if Henry is always late? He doesn't realize that the Fat Controller depends on me.
He's still very impatient, as evident when he doesn't wait and leaves his guard behind. When he meets Terence the Tractor for the first time, the first words out of his mouth is an insult.
"I'm Thomas. I'm pulling a train. What ugly wheels you've got."
Damn, Thomas, okay, calm down. Bertie the Bus gets introduced here, who proves an effective enabler to Thomas. He's the one that feeds into Thomas's competitive side.
"I've come to help you with your passengers today." "Help me?" said Thomas crossly, going bluer than ever and letting off steam. "I can go faster than you."
Wait.
"You can't."
I'm going to send the link so I could,
"I'll race you," said Bertie.
And the two have their famous race to the end of the line. Thomas and Bertie is a rather significant story in the Railway series lore. Wilbert's children often asked Wilbert how it was possible that a race between a train and a bus was fair. Clearly the train had the advantage, and so Wilbert drew up a map of the route to show them that Thomas and Bertie each had an equal number of obstacles on their journey. The logistics of the race led to Wilbert figuring out the first ever map of Thomas's branch line, which, as we all know, evolved into him figuring out the entire geography and later history of the island of Sodor. The Railway series' incredibly deep lore really got its start here, from a simple story where Thomas and a red bus race each other. When it came to figuring out the eventual lore, Wilbert was usually very big on not changing established canon in the stories as written. As Thomas was depicted as an E2 class in the original illustrations, that's what he stuck to. Thomas's official backstory became that he was an E2 class tank engine from Brighton, built for the London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway in 1915. As a result of a wartime mix-up, Thomas found his way north to Sodor, and ended up staying there on loan to help build the Northwestern Railway. Among the several other loaned engines there was Edward, and the two helped build the railway together, hence explaining Edward's sympathy towards Thomas in Thomas and the Trucks. The two had a pre-established friendship. After the railway opened for traffic, Thomas was kept as a station pilot at Vicarstown. Topham Hatt eventually expressed interest in purchasing the engines. The paperwork for Thomas went through first, and so Thomas technically became the first engine officially owned by the Northwestern Railway, hence his number 1. In 1925, the Farquhar Quarry was established on the west of Sodor, and the branch line from Knapford was extended to it. A larger engine was needed to run the new line. This coincided with Thomas rescuing James. As Thomas was available, Topham elected him to run the line. This is all very technical, and admittedly it does kind of diminish the significance of Thomas proving himself in that story. It makes it all kind of seem like it was a wild coincidence, and Topham was likely going to have him run it anyway. Nonetheless, Thomas was promoted to work the branch line. Over the years, the line gained other engines, including Toby in 1951 and Percy in 1955. While Wilbert was very big on not changing established details, that did not mean he wouldn't write new stories to change the characters that were a point of contention for him. We saw this occur previously with Henry in The Flying Kipper, a story he wrote where Henry crashed specifically so he could be sent away to be rebuilt into something prototypical. The same kind of occurred with Thomas. Wilbert never liked how inconsistent Thomas's running board was between illustrations. The real E2s had dips at the front and back. Thomas lacked the rear dip, which, in Wilbert's eyes, meant his front and rear buffer beams were at different heights. So he wrote a story where Thomas crashed and had to be fully rebuilt to amend this issue. The story became Book 16's Thomas Comes to Breakfast, the notorious story where Thomas attempted to drive himself, only to not be able to stop, and crashed into a station master's house. It is so fascinating to me how a story that was birthed from the author simply wanting to change a detail became a story that embodied the character so well. Yes, Thomas does crash in this, just so his front could be changed, but it all occurs in a very Thomas way. He gets cocky from his driver's compliments.
"You know just where to stop," laughed his driver. "You could almost manage without me." Thomas had become conceited. He didn't realize his driver was joking. "Driver says I don't need him now," he told the others.
Which makes him think he can drive himself. He tries to when no one's looking, and it all ends in calamity, ending with Thomas learning a lesson in humility. Wilbert was just a genius like that. I think this story's popularity is a real testament to his writing abilities. This was one of Chris Awdry's favorite stories.
This is certainly one of my favourite stories, and I believe it was one of Father's favourites too. It's called Thomas Comes to Breakfast.
And that is fascinating to me because this story was written in 1961. Chris would have been 21 or so then. This isn't one of the stories from his childhood that would have been more sentimental to him, and yet it's one of his favorites. It quite possibly might be the most definitive Thomas story out there. This is all to say that Wilbert didn't change details just to change them. He worked those changes into the world naturally, and it kept things interesting. When Thomas returned from the works, he gained a new look, complete with a totally flat running board from front to rear, and this remains consistent in pretty much every book following. Following this, Thomas's next major appearance is in Book 18, Stepney the Blue Engine. In this, he becomes offended after being sidelined on his own branch line, so the visiting engine Stepney can pass through. Though after being talked up so much by Stepney, he forgets to be angry.
"Ah, well," said Thomas modestly, "perhaps when you know the road as I do—" "Exactly," put in Stepney. "You're such an expert." Thomas, flattered, forgot he was cross and told Stepney all about his branch line.
It's not hard to convince Thomas of anything. Just feed into his ego a bit, and he'll agree to whatever. After this point, Thomas essentially stops being used. With the exception of a quick mention in mainline engines, Thomas does not appear in 7 consecutive books. I've always deduced that Wilbert kind of got bored with Thomas around this time and turned his attention to other characters that had more going on with them. Characters that he had more to say about, like Gordon, Henry, Duck, and the Skarloey engines. And I think this sort of embodies the quintessential flaw with Thomas in the Railway series. Now, this is just my opinion, of course, but unlike Gordon or Henry or Duck, Thomas doesn't really have a big character arc. He does in his first book, of course, but from the end of that book onwards, I've always felt that Thomas has stayed rather stagnant as a character. He never changed much or was given any sort of big status quo change. He's always been kept in his little bubble of Sodor, and that's really it. And maybe that's why Wilbur got bored of him. There's only so many stories that can be written that essentially use the same formula. Thomas gets boastful, or is rude to someone, or disobeys an order, and then gets his comeuppance. Now, that's not to say that there aren't any nuances with the character, though. One of my favorite status quo changes of the series, as minute as it is in the grand scheme of things, is between Thomas and Gordon in Book 8's Down the Mine. After Thomas falls into a mine after deliberately passing a danger sign, Gordon comes to his rescue. Both characters are in disgrace at this point in time, and they have a laugh about their situations. They agree to form an alliance.
We're both in disgrace. Shall we form an alliance? What was it? An alliance, Thomas. United we stand, together we fall. You help me, and I'll help you. How about it? Right you are, said Thomas. Good, that's settled. And buffer to buffer, the allies puffed home.
Gordon is the one who suggests it, and I think this admittedly says more about Gordon than it does Thomas. But still, from this point onwards, Thomas and Gordon never are rude to each other again. Both characters grew out of their infancy. There's the occasional teasing here and there, but it's always good-natured. The two undoubtedly have a mutual respect for each other.
As the tank engines moved wearily away, Gordon looked at Thomas and smiled. Then he took 3 deep breaths and winked. He didn't need to say anything. Thomas knew exactly what he meant.
The big rivalry introduced in Thomas's first story was followed up on and given a proper resolution. And they stuck to it. Thomas is brought out one final time in Wilbert's last book, Tramway Engines, in 1972. This was a push from the publishers and his own wife, Margaret, who insisted Wilbert write one more book and put his most famous character in it. Wilbert was, as the Thomas the Tank Engine man states, a bit fed up with it all at this point. This is reflected in the book's foreword.
Dear friends, Thomas has been pestering me to write about his branch line. After all, he said, we are the importantest part of the whole railway.
Thomas pestering Wilbert to write about his branch line, of course, is a slight at the publishers pestering Wilbert for more Thomas. And hilariously, Thomas only features in 2 stories here, both of which are focused on Percy. Thomas's final contribution to Wilbert's works was him laughing at poor Percy's appearance.
Look what's crawled out of the hay! Talk about hairy caterpillars, puffed Thomas as he started away. It's worth being late to have seen you!
How very appropriately Thomas. Even after the series ended, Thomas continued to be the most popular character and face of the franchise. The series was commonly known as the Thomas the Tank Engine books, rather than the Railway series, and the marketing played into that. Look at the cover of the 1979 annual. It's literally called the Thomas the Tank Engine Annual. And this was
this is going to go on forever.
That even this early on, Thomas was the face of the Railway series, despite not being its main character. The TV series got greenlit in 1983, which was unsurprisingly titled Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. I'll of course talk more about Thomas specifically in the show in the next section, but I do want to touch on how the show's popularity affected the trajectory of the books. Chris Awdry took over as author that same year and continued the Railway series. The publishers, Kay and Ward, wanted more videos, and so Thomas appears in a lot of Chris's books. Of the 16 books that Chris wrote,
It's
8 of them
okay,
have
please.
Thomas in the book's title or have him on the cover, a couple of which Thomas
It's
barely
okay,
appears
but
in. Thomas's increased popularity from the TV show at the time meant Chris was kind of stuck using Thomas for a lot of his stories, and thus several other characters were sorely underused, like Duck, Oliver, Boko, Bear, and the Scarlovians. Chris was allowed some creative freedom, of course, but he has expressed frustration about the demands for Thomas to appear so heavily and having to discard some of his own original book ideas in favor of Thomas-focused ones. That being said, I think there's a good number of interesting Thomas books in Chris's run. Book 30, More About Thomas the Tank Engine, a very creative title, was deliberately written in a rush to tie into the TV series, so the show would have more Thomas-centric stories to adapt in its second season. The book overall is a little unimaginative. Chris himself even admits so in Sodor Reading Between the Lines. But it does give us a little bit more to the best frenemies dynamic between Thomas and Percy. Until this point, I always looked at the two as work colleagues. Like, they're clearly friendly and they trust each other enough. Thomas has trusted Percy with Annie and Clarabelle on occasion in the past, after all. But I feel it's always been kind of out of courtesy. If you're forced to work with someone that you don't really like for several years, you will grow to like each other over time. Toby is the median between the two, but it's pretty clear that he and Percy are much closer, while Thomas is more off in his own world. The Thomas-Percy best frenemies dynamic is actually really funny to me, because both are so evenly matched in their own limited ways. Percy is naive, so he takes everything he's told as true, or is always asking questions.
I say, Toby, what's a drip? Do you know? I heard a boy on the platform call his friend one this afternoon.
Thomas knows better, but he's a hothead, so he never has the patience for his dumb inquiries.
The boy just thought his friend was being a coward, or silly, or a spoilsport.
But Percy outmatches Thomas in wits, and you can always clap back at him with the perfect comeback.
If you stopped me from doing something nice, would you be a drip, Thomas? You're the drip, answered Thomas crossly.
Two evenly matched nitwits arguing over nothing, while good old Toby sits on the sideline with his popcorn, watching in amusement. This book sees Thomas and Percy falling out over an incident with Cole in its first story, which isn't resolved by the story's end. Their friendship is finally mended in the last story, Drip Tank, after Percy rescues Thomas.
I'm sorry I was rude, said Thomas as Percy helped him back to the shed. That tank of mine turned me into a bigger drip than we expected, didn't it? Can we be friends again, please? Percy was delighted to agree.
It's nice, and I felt that the two are a lot closer after this book. I don't believe they have another argument or ever tease each other again after this. Book 33, Thomas and the Twins, is a pretty inspired volume, in which Thomas is sent to work on Edward's line while a bridge on his line is strengthened. This is one of the first times in a long time we see Thomas working in a new place on Sodor, interacting for the first time with Bill and Ben, characters that have always been there, but he's never met. I quite like how this touches on his friendship with Edward again, something I feel was sorely underused in the books. I love how after Bill and Ben get Thomas all riled up, Edward breaks up the commotion and leads Thomas away.
Thomas let off steam indignantly. Let me tell you, he began. All right, you two, laughed Edward. Go and move those trucks, or there won't be room for any more.
He knows Thomas well, and he knew to get him out of there before things got ugly.
You just don't have to take them too seriously, exclaimed Edward. Thomas.
Hold on. All right, finally, Awdry got some Bible students. Can't drink one because he doesn't have any hand. Hold on, I'll be back. Alright, I'm back. George. Ooh. That might be copyright. Or yeah, that might be copyright, so I'll mute it. Oh no, yeah. My my favorite my favorite movie.
And I'd rather just end this section with the Great Discovery. It just feels more appropriate. I think the model series overall really justified Thomas being its main character. He has so much range as a character, and he has such unique relationships with the greater main cast, which creates so much story potential. I loved watching him grow up across those early seasons, and even when those later seasons started to meander, there were still bright spots. We did also see some of the side effects of making Thomas the main as we got into those later seasons. Some character backtracking, and he was in general very overused. A lot of repetition there, and frankly, a lot of episodes that you can just skip and not miss anything. But they brought it home beautifully with the Great Discovery. Thomas is a great main character. His flaws are what make him so fun to follow, even when he's at his worst.
CGI. Oh, not yet.
Thomas shunted trucks in the yard. He felt his position deeply, and he took his anger out on the trucks.
Take that!
Well, isn't this a lovely fight? Thomas the Tank Engine
back in the yard?
Oh, hi, Bertie.
I heard about your accident. Shame about that. Well, guess what? I've been assigned to take your passengers for you. But don't worry, I'll take good care of them. So good that they may never want to ride your bumpy rails again after riding a smooth red bus like me.
No.
See you, Thomas. Enjoy your retirement.
Oh, ha ha. Real funny, Bertie.
Later that day, Thomas returned to the sheds for a rest, but he wasn't alone.
Oh, looky here, Henry. So it is true. James told us you were back in our yard.
Oh, no.
We heard about your little accident. Not your finest moment, was it? No matter how long it's been, you're still that silly little tank engine that got dragged behind the express all those years ago.
Hey, Ethan.
Hello.
Miss, I got a little carried away there. Only teasing.
Oh, it's not you, Gordon.
What are we watching?
Just everything.
The Soda's Finest
I
with
don't
Thomas,
want to be
because I've
stuck
been
in the
wanting to
yard
watch this for
again.
a long
All
time.
these years, and I'm right
All
back
right.
where I
I
started.
finished the Railway series, but I'm getting close. But I just
You
finished.
won't
I
mind,
finished the Railway series
Every
and the
shoulder
Mall
here has
series.
been
We just
enough
got to do the
to work
CGI series and see which one
sometime
he'll
working
pick.
hard. You
Okay, then.
personally,
And then I might end the
We would
stream
know.
because that's all I want to do.
Every time you've all left us to
Then you
shunt
could join
our
the
own
next
coaches.
stream. I'm gonna put the ending in English scene if you want to watch me play it.
Anyways,
Sure.
the point is,
Have you played that
you
game
got your
before?
branch line from working hard. in
Yes,
the-
I have, but it has
Which again?
been a while.
Yeah, Thomas, be the best shunter you could be, and the fat controller will surely come around. He always
I like
does.
the voices.
Show him you are the shining
Yeah.
example of a perfect engine. It's just like you used to say. Hard work pays off, right?
Ah, you're right. That's what I'll do. Thanks, you two.
And so, Thomas did as Gordon and Henry advised. For the next week, he worked very hard. He shunted trucks in the yard. He pushed coaches for the big engines. And he even took goods trains for the others. All without complaint.
Did you get my voice? Did I get? Damn it! Did you get my voice lines?
The fat controller.
Yeah, I sent them to you. Yeah, I did. I sent them to
Right on
you.
time, Thomas.
All right.
A great effort. I've noticed a big turnaround in your work ethic, and I have to say I am quite pleased with you.
Oh, thank you, sir.
As you've been so helpful this week, I have a new job for you. Our newcomer, Oliver, has just returned from the works. Before he goes off the ducks line, I'd like you to teach him how to shunt coaches. Show him how we do things here. Can I trust you with that?
Oh, yes, sir. Of course, sir.
That's a good engine. He's waiting in the yard for you.
Oh,
That wasn't in that.
nope. He was supposed to crash into a wall.
Luckily, no one was hurt. But Thomas was in quite a state.
Oh.
Alright, CGI.
After a couple years of experimentation, Hit Entertainment officially switched Thomas and Friends over to full CGI animation in 2009. This new medium presented the world of Sodor in a way that had never been depicted before. Now the engines could be shown from new angles, their mouths finally moved, and they permanently gained their own voices, separate from the narrator.
Your fans are going to get to hear you speak in your own voice for the very first time. How do you feel about that?
Bubbling boilers. Every useful engine has their own story to tell.
Before we get into the history of CGI Thomas, let's talk about Thomas's many voices in the
CGI
CGI
Thomas
series.
and
Ben Small first voiced Thomas in the UK, and Martin Sherman in the US. I think both had some growing pains, finding their groove with the character at first, But it all
T.I.
came
is
together
my
as time went on.
favorite.
He each gave a very different
And
performance.
when I
Then
was
Small voices
younger
Thomas with
back
a
then,
younger, higher-pitched, childlike voice.
Morning,
and
James.
I wonder what happened to the
Where are you
models.
talking
And then I
to?
looked it
It
up,
suited
and
the sort of
they were
stories
taken
that they were telling with
in
Thomas at the
manner.
time. Sherman gave
Okay.
Thomas more of a teenager voice. I believe he himself said that he
What?
imagined Thomas as a 15-year-old.
I will meet Spencer at dawn, and I will win.
A very different performance.
He says a
And,
teenager.
I like it. I like seeing a slightly older take on Thomas, and I appreciate how natural the voice sounds. He sounds so normal compared to some of the other characters.
Hello, are you Thomas? Yes, I am.
In 2014, the cast was overhauled, and Small and Sherman left the series. John Hassler and Joseph May came in to voice Thomas for the UK and US respectively, both making their debuts in the special, The Adventure Begins. John Hassler is like the perfect in-between of Small and Sherman. Thomas still has that higher-pitched voice that we associate with him, but it somehow sounds more natural, if that makes sense.
They're pleased to see me. They've never seen me pulling a train before. Oh, it's nice of them to wave.
Hassler is my personal favorite Thomas voice. Joseph May, on the other hand,
Rain make it, rain make it.
Apartment 2B.
I don't give a damn.
Just to the next signal box, ladies. First past the post wins the race.
yeah, I'm not a big fan of this take. This voice doesn't really suit Thomas very well, in my opinion. It just sounds, I don't know, generic, forced, especially with that Pillsbury Doughboy-like giggle he does for him.
It makes me look as if I'm going on safari.
Like Funfetti. He's alright, depending on the episode. I think he did a great job in Lost Treasure. But overall, it's a Thomas voice that doesn't really work for me, personally. Alright, let's get into the seasons themselves. The first 4 seasons of the CGI era were animated by Nitrogen Studios and headed by then head writer Sharon Miller, who wrote a majority of the episodes. Things kicked off with the special Hero of the Rails, and frankly, this is the most likable Thomas ever was in this era. In this, he comes across an old abandoned engine called Hero and vows to get him steaming again, no matter the cost.
I promise I will make you a really useful engine once more. I will make you master of the
railway again.
His loyalty and his promise to Hero is commendable, and it's a shame that this side of Thomas is hardly touched on again after this. Hero of the Rails is solid and a pretty fun watch, and it's a total shock to the system going from it to the seasons that directly follow it. Because, to put it bluntly, the Nitrogen seasons are not good. The writing is lazy.
I already
And
know.
I would go as far to say Thomas
The lazy
character,
writing,
lowest
the
point
three
of
strikes
the franchise.
formula.
For the overwhelming majority of these 4 seasons, Thomas is portrayed as an absolute doofus who does the dumbest things imaginable.
Take the track through the woods. Don't worry, Hero. I will.
So, Thomas didn't take the track through the wood as Hero had told him to.
I must make
That's
sure them
because you're
crows
dumb. Wah, wah.
So Thomas puffed after the crows, leaving the field behind.
Look, that's perfect. I can ride to the mainland on that.
The chains are
That's-
rusty.
That could be
Don't worry.
dangerous.
I make good decisions.
What is this, bro?
Wait, Thomas! He blew his wonky whistle loud and long.
You're telling me that
that
Thomas
is
can't
weird.
hear how messed up his whistle is? You're kidding me, right?
What is this, bro?
I'm currently rewatching the Nitrogen seasons for the retrospective, and I gotta say, Thomas is just unbearable in these. He is easily my least favorite character of the main cast. He's just too stupid to root for. In the model hit seasons, he was repetitive and overused, but they still did some fun stuff with him. Now he's repetitive, overused, and unlikable.
Thomas felt terrible. Thomas felt terrible. Thomas felt terrible. Thomas
We know, blah, blah, blah.
Blah, 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 blah.
fell.
An episode where there was a
I'm just gonna skip. I can't stand it. I might just go to. I'm just gonna go to the.
plot. At least not till the third act or so. It's so wonderful following a version of Thomas that I actually want to root for again. Andrew Brenner became head writer for the series following Blue Mountain Mystery, starting with season 17. There were a lot of changes made behind the scenes this season, gaining an all-new producer and writing team. And right away, you can tell that some work had been done to improve Thomas himself. The first episode of the season that came out was Gordon Runs Dry, and I will never forget that opening scene. Thomas strolls up to Gordon complaining about whatever at Knapford, and he teases him.
Where are my coaches? I shouldn't be kept waiting.
Maybe you should fetch your own coaches, Gordon.
Ha!
And I just got this cozy feeling of relief. I'm home again.
I'm not really a
The
fan of the
Thomas we
U.S.
love
voice. It
is
really
back,
makes me.
baby.
It's not. I'm
It
not a
brought
fan
Thomas
of
back
it.
to his roots.
I actually.
Shining the spotlight on so many key aspects of his character that had long been
I like
forgotten.
the U.S.
Thomas now primarily runs his branch.
I like the U.S.
We
more.
get
It's
so many
more
adventures
fine,
that
but
take
the
place
UK,
in
I can't
Thomas and
stand
Bertie
it.
actually race each other again. Thomas hates wearing his snowplow. Thomas teases the big engines. Thomas looks up to Edward. Thomas and Percy are still best friends, but it's not the only thing that's focused on. They greatly pulled back from forcing Thomas into
Duck
so
and
many
Percy.
episodes too. He is the star of a handful, sure, but they let a lot of other characters have the spotlight, even the really obscure ones. The world of Sodor felt so much fuller again. But one of the greatest things that the Brenner era did with Thomas, at least in my opinion, is how much time they focused on the relationship between him and Annie and Clarabelle. Annie and Clarabelle were really just props in the previous eras. Like, it was clear that Thomas loved them and got offended on their behalf.
Those coaches are old and uncomfortable. Why don't you use them as beach huts instead? Thomas
Dang.
was most upset. You won't let them turn Annie and Clarabelle into beach
Yeah,
huts,
Sir
will you?
Topham had holiday.
They never really participated in stories. Do you know how many times Thomas pulled Annie and Clarabelle in an episode, and the writers either forgot that they were alive or just chose to not have them speak? There's a number of times where them speaking up would have prevented a lot of trouble. But no, they were just treated as props, essentially. And we never really learned much about them other than they exist. But ever since Blue Mountain Mystery, these two are now actual characters. Their relationship with Thomas has never been stronger. And there is no greater example of this than
Not
the
so
season
slow
18 episode,
coaches.
Not So Slow Coaches. In this episode, we start by seeing a glimpse of the daily life between Thomas and the coaches. Thomas always tries to push his limits, and Annie and Clarabelle always nag him. It's clear that they all love each other, but they grow fed up with each other too. Annie and Clarabelle don't like going fast, and Thomas doesn't like always being told what to do by them. Things change one day when the coaches accidentally get coupled to Caitlin the Streamliner and get dragged on a high-speed ride to the mainland. Thomas, who catches them departing at the very last second, without a moment's haste, sets chase after them.
Wait, come back!
He doesn't even think about it. He realizes his coaches are in trouble, and he is off to save them. Like, realistically, there is
How can
no
Thomas
way
save them
Thomas
if
can
he's
catch
not
up
built
with
for
him.
speed?
He is a streamliner going at high speeds, but he doesn't care. His emotions overpower him, and he races across.
He maybe
the
wouldn't need
entire
Spencer
island
to help.
save his
He
coach.
maybe wouldn't need. He would maybe need Gordon to help him to get them. He would maybe need Gordon to help him.
Good point, but what if Gordon is busy with his
They've never known this
express
guy before, and we quickly realize perhaps they've been too harsh on Thomas all this time.
I'll never complain about Thomas again! Nor will I!
Thomas eventually reaches the edge of the island, but the bridge is up.
I'll never be able to catch up with Caitlin now!
All hope seems lost. Annie and Clarabelle are gone.
Not so long.
Not just
Eventually,
joking, I
little
would
Hero comes to the rescue and brings Annie and Clarabelle back. The episode wraps up with a heart-to-heart between the trio as they travel home. Thomas apologizes for pushing his limits, and the coaches apologize for nagging. Everyone learned a lesson, and their bond has never been stronger. They all know now not to take each other for granted. I've said in the past that this is my favorite episode of the CGI series, and I still stand by that. I think it is just so goddamn wholesome, and it really showed how much potential there is in stories centered around this trio. Let's talk backstory. The Adventure Begins came out towards the middle of the Brenner run, and it was made in honor of the franchise's 70th anniversary. Holy crap, this was 10 years ago.
Dang.
I'm so old. This movie was a modern retelling of the first 2 books of the Railway series, or the first 7 episodes
I
of
don't
the
think
movie
it's
series.
not that
From the
old.
origin story, basically. This was the first time we got any glimpse of Thomas's life pre-Sodor, showing up to the railway still painted in his original LBSC colors. However, the story is altered a bit to fit this retelling. Instead of Thomas and Edward being the first engines on the railway, now Thomas shows up
I've never watched The Adventure Begins, but I might watch it.
we learn what Henry's deal is by Edward explaining it to Thomas, aka us. Or we learn who the coffee pots are by, again, Edward explaining it to Thomas, aka us. It also creates a better underdog story. Everyone puts their noses up at the new guy, and that makes us want to root for him from the start. I do think an unfortunate side effect of writing the story this way is how it changes the span of time that Thomas was actually stuck in the yard for. Prior, it was implied that Thomas had been stuck in the yard for years, hence his desire for a change of scenery. Whereas here, he's been there for a month, maybe? And then he gets his branch line. He yearns to see the world.
But I want to go places and do things. I want to see the world.
Despite just recently trekking across the UK from Brighton.
I believe this was before Percy. Where were you from?
The more you think about it,
what did it say? Where were you from? What's that say? Hold on. Oh, hold on, Ethan. What does that say?
Yo, where are you from? Right?
What was that? Dug in the water.
The more you think about it,
this is a top 5 years.
Regardless of the
team I
changes,
did.
I fully accept it as the CGI canon's take on the origin story. One of the best things The Adventure Begins really put a spotlight on, in my opinion, was Thomas's friendship with Edward.
Yeah,
this
of
is something
course.
that the books and the model series, to an extent, really.
Hold on, I'll be back. Alright, I'm back. Let's continue.
He missed out on using more. It's always been clear that Thomas respects Edward in the previous eras.
Why, Edward could beat you in a race any day. Really? Said James.
Thomas and Percy were cross. Edward was their friend.
But here we actually get to see why. Edward is his mentor, and the only of the bunch to really give Thomas a chance. He explains things to Thomas, and Thomas comes to him for advice. And they continue this after the movie in several episodes. Thomas gets advice from Edward on how to handle Max and Monty and mucking about. Edward looks out for Thomas when his sandbox fails and a cranky Christmas. and Edward compares the newcomer, Philip, to Thomas when he first arrived in Philip to the Rescue.
I'm gonna skip this. I don't really like it.
Was already...
I'm just gonna go right here.
I love this moment. Even before the adventure begins, Brenner was already playing with this friendship, as seen in Season 18's Old Reliable Edward, when Thomas comes up with a plan to pay Gordon out for being rude to Edward.
Mates.
And Annie and Clarabelle, I really get the impression that there were certain relationships that Brenner felt were missing within the show. And once he was head writer, he quickly pushed those to the forefront. I feel that there are basically two different versions of Thomas in the Brenner era that they switch between depending on the episode, both of which I think are pushed to each of their limits in the two movies, The Adventure Begins and Soder's Legend of the Lost Treasure. Ironically, both came out the same year. The Adventure Begins portrays Thomas as nice. A little too nice. Here he is depicted as a nice guy from the start. I get it. They made him nice to contrast the big, snooty engines. But it sort of feels a little untrue of the character, and it kind of misses the point of the book. Thomas was meant to be a prick at the start of that book. Him getting his just desserts from Gordon in Thomas and Gordon was deserved. He was essentially an unlikable protagonist, starting at a low point. When he messed up, we laughed at him. But over the course of the book, he improved himself, and he got to a point where he won us over, and we wanted to see him succeed. Whereas here, he's already well-mannered from the beginning. Like, he consoles Henry about his fear of the rain a couple times.
Rain is just water, the same as you put in your boiler. So, how can you be afraid of it?
He's a total gentleman to Annie and Clarabelle when he first meets them.
I'm terribly sorry, your ladyships. You see, I'm new around here.
Etc. The most Thomas-y thing that he does here is wake Gordon up from his slumber.
Wake up, lazy bones! Why don't you work hard like me?
Which, of course, only happens because, well, it happened in the book, and Gordon needed a motivation to pull one over on him later. He doesn't really change that much over the course of the story. He does change. He becomes more patient and a little less clumsy.
Uh-oh.
But that's about it. I'm not a huge fan of this nice Thomas. It's okay. He's certainly more likable here than he was in the Nitrogen seasons, and I do still like The Adventure Begins for what it is. It's a fun time. But I prefer Thomas with a little more bite to him, especially here.
Hang on a second, Benny. I'll be right back.
That is yours. Right. Q. Lost Treasure. Soder's Legend of the Lost Treasure is almost like an unofficial sequel to The Adventure Begins. It certainly feels that way watching them back to back. Now we've shot forward to present day. Thomas has been on his branch line for years now, and his characterization has kind of 180'd. Now he's way more cheeky, cocky, and confident.
My branch line is the most important part of the whole railway. I'll always be Sir Topham Hatt's #1 engine.
And when he doesn't get his way, he mopes and complains.
Sir Topham Hatt has taken my branch line away and given it to some other tank engine called Ryan.
His overconfidence is his essential flaw in this movie, of course. And over the course of the story, he learns to check himself. I like this. And I get what they were doing here. Thomas has been riding his high horse on his branch line for so long that he's grown a big head, and he needs to be brought back down to earth. Of the two, this version of Thomas feels a lot truer to me. Some of the best episodes of this era use this cheekier, cockier side of Thomas. Not So Slow Coaches, as we already talked about, Thomas the Quarry Engine, Bradford the Brake Van, Thomas and the Emergency Cable, among others. But there's also plenty of great episodes that use that nicer, more responsible Thomas too. See Lost Property, Thomas the Babysitter, Unscheduled Stops, Terrence Breaks the Ice, among others. In the past, I've criticized this and called Thomas inconsistent in this era, but I now have a new perspective on it. Both of these two takes being used interchangeably creates a rather well-rounded main character. The naughty Thomas episodes always make it clear that his intentions are good, and the nice Thomas episodes have the impulsive side poking through.
So, I won't stop at all.
And
Good idea, Thomas.
found
The
a nice middle
episode
ground.
Thomas
Feel.
the
It's kind of like
Quarry
season 6 Thomas that I talked about liking
one of my
earlier.
favorite
Unlike the
CGI
hit era and
episodes.
nitrogen seasons, where I feel Thomas's dumber side is just way overused, which of course make the scenes where he's the voice of reason just feel out of place. They knew now to save most of the wise voice of reason stuff for characters like Edward, and save the really dumb plots for characters who are, well, kinda dumb or scatterbrained. You know, ones that they feel appropriate for. Thomas in this era, at his core, is a nice guy with a good heart, but he has his demons, and he sometimes lets his impulsive
Oh my
side
god, look at
show.
that.
I can't actually think of an episode or movie in the Brenner era where Thomas was severely out of character. In all honesty, The Adventure Begins might be the biggest offender here, and it almost feels wrong to say that. Then Bwaba happened.
Uh-oh.
2018 was a year of big change for the show.
Big
The
World,
show
Big
stopped
Adventures.
rebooting itself into Thomas and
Crap.
Friends, Big World, Big Adventures, in which half of each new season saw Thomas visiting other countries. This was done.
Yeah, we don't give a
deliberately
crap.
to expand the brand to other
I
potential
do
markets of the
like a
world,
Thomas
like
goes to other
directly
countries,
them
but I would like
in the
them.
form of bringing
But
Thomas
I would
to
like it.
them
But I
in the
think
show.
he's.
And their justification for
But
this was Thomas's line in his first book, where he said he wanted to see the world.
I'm
Well,
tired
he did
of pushing
say
bridges. I want to see the world.
in the
Obviously,
series
this was
that
just
now
an
he gets his
Literal
chance.
globe-trotting was not the original intention of that line. The other half of the show took place back on Sodor, which also saw a ton of changes. There were cast changes, implementation of more fantasy sequence dream crap, and the engines all gained the ability to gesture their bodies around freely when they spoke, like Cars characters. By all accounts,
Yeah,
the
I
show
don't like the
pretty much did
bouncing
everything
or
it
the
could
movements.
to become
It's
a
quite
cartoon,
weird.
while still trying to hold on to a semblance of
It's
what
like
it was before.
they're
These
mimicking
two approaches
chugging,
totally clashed, and
something
it
like
really
Yeah,
that.
evolved
but
in these last few seasons.
is Thomas
that
kind of
Thomas
out
and
of character
Friends
in the
was having
Blubba
a
era?
major identity crisis. An
Maybe.
identity crisis
Oh
that
god,
proved
all
its
engines
plagueis for the
go.
several years that followed. But how was Thomas
I absolutely
himself
hate that
handled here?
one.
Frankly, I find Thomas annoying in this era. It seems like a repeat of the same issues we saw before in the hit era.
To me, I
He's
think
just
All
so
Engines
overused.
Go is alright for me, though,
as
but
well as
not
having
just for
Sodor Central
you.
stories devoted to him too. And on top of all of that, Thomas became the narrator in this era.
Number one engine.
Davy Moore.
One day, when I was working on the Chinese railway, I was running a little late.
He's everywhere. We can't escape him. There's a lot I could pick apart about the Big World era, about how Thomas being in these countries is never explained, about how Thomas being in the Sodor episodes is confusing, and it's never explained if these take place before or after the international stuff, or how the Bubba movie proved the show could survive without a narrator, only for the show to shove Thomas in as one. But I don't know. I mean, these problems aside, I think my biggest issue with Thomas in this era is that he just doesn't feel like Thomas anymore. He just seems like a generic cartoon character in these episodes. A fish out of water just to have culture stuff be explained to. He feels more like Thomas in the regular Sodor episodes.
Maybe the creators are like, oh, I have an idea. How about we just take this blue British tank
Nonetheless, the show's
and
identity crisis
turn
led
it
to
into
a
a
audiences weren't interested. Only 3 seasons in, it was announced that season 24 would be the final season of
that's a
Thomas
good
and Friends.
idea. The fans are going to think
So,
that Thomas is
how
a
did they
dumb.
end things?
Terrible.
They went out with a special. Thomas and the Royal Engine, produced in
Oh
honor of
yeah.
the 75th
I guess this is a
anniversary
good
in
finale,
2020.
but
In
do you
this,
think
Sir
Thomas's
Topham
animal would have been
presented
a
an
horrible
award by
finale to the
Queen
series?
herself, and by
I
request of
think
Prince Charles,
Thomas and the
Francis William
Royal
Engine
Engine is more like the
special
episode
their adventure to the big city
Pink
and all the
Pots and
scrapes that they have along the way. After several
I believe this is a good
misfortunes and having
finale.
an engine in need, the duo do make it to London, but in quite a state. You know, if you were to ask me to write a finale to the series, I would probably try to think of something that involves all the main characters in some way. Some big event akin to like The Great Discovery or something. But this finale takes a more subdued approach, and instead of having it focus on everyone, it instead focuses solely on Thomas and Sir Topham. The Thomas
Like,
and
how many
Topham
times has
dynamic
Thomas left
is one that is
Sodor?
very
He's
overlooked.
probably left a few
From
times.
day one, it's always been clear that Thomas
Also,
has a
how
great
is he
respect
going to get
for
to
Topham
Sodor
and
if he's
wants to
in
please
London?
him.
How does he know the way
Seems
back to
so crushed
Sodor?
whenever he approaches
Probably
him.
by
It's
ship
also been
or
very
boat
clear
or
that Topham
something,
admires Thomas
or
for his
if he
persistence
is
and
blowing
has a soft
coal
spot
in
for him.
water, he'll
Thomas
probably
trying to prove his
refill.
worth to Topham is the story arc that basically kicked off everything. And now
I
we've
mean,
come full
London's
circle.
all
The show
the way
started
on
with
the
Thomas
other
proving
side
himself
of
to
the
Topham,
world.
and it ended with Thomas proving how invaluable he is to him again, one final time. I think the decision to focus such a momentous episode on these two specifically was very inspired. It's not the finale I expected, but one I'm very happy with.
It is my pleasure to present to you a special crest, signifying to all that you have truly been, if you don't mind me saying,
And Thomas looks so dirty.
Going by production order, the final ever production of the series is this stupid dumbass episode where
Yeah,
Thomas
I know.
dresses up as
I
a
hate
monkey.
it.
Just ask for Cheeky Monkey Thomas.
Yeah, no, we're just gonna ignore that.
Yeah,
The Royal
screw
Engine
them.
Yeah, me
final-
too. I don't really like that episode.
Whoa,
If that was the finale, I would be fine with it.
Of any character.
And why was it written by Davey Moore?
He started out pretty
It was
solid.
if it was
He
written by
felt
someone
he
else,
felt
I would
a
understand.
low
But Davey
immediately.
Moore,
Then for a good
no.
while, he was great and lovable again. Then he fell to another new low, and somehow ended solid. A real roller coaster.
Alright, let's see which one he'll
With an
pick.
MSP individual vision plan,
I don't give a crap.
because taking care of your eye health.
Get out! Boo!
Alright, let's see which one he'll pick.
And so we reached
Which
the
one do you
end
think he'll
of our
pick?
Thomas deep dive.
I don't know. Maybe we just need to see
The three eras do I think portrayed Thomas the best.
the original.
Story in the Railway series. I love the story of how Thomas originated and how he has such a purposeful place in the railway system. But I also love the subtle maturing arc in those first 5 seasons of the model series. Thomas grew as a character alongside.
Is this going to be a hard one
That's
for
something
him?
I think is so cool in a kid's show.
Yeah.
But then I also love the relationships between Thomas and Annie and Clarabelle, and Thomas and Edward, and Thomas and Topham, and pretty much everyone in the CGI series. And just how overall well-rounded he was as a main character in
See which
CGI.
one.
At least
See
in the
which one he'll
Rebels.
pick.
Each era has its pros as well as its cons, and I'm finding it kind of impossible to choose one. I don't
Railway
think I really
series?
like one more over the other, to be honest. I think it comes down to your own personal preference. Which do you value more? The realism of the backstory, the character arc, or the character relationships? I value all three pretty highly, so I'm going to do an all-time first in Sodor's Finest and choose this. The best version of Thomas is a mesh of all three eras. Give me a Thomas with the backstory from the books, who matures over time with the on-screen relationships he has with pretty much everyone in CGI. That would be a pretty perfect Thomas. To me. But if there's anything we learned from this long, deep dive, that Thomas in any of his forms is far from perfect.
What do you think of my whistling?
Yeah. Which one did he pick? He didn't pick any of them.
Evening, Thomas. Have the whole
I don't know
shed
which-
to yourself tonight, hmm?
Which one did he pick?
I don't know. I don't know.
I think all of them because he loves all of them. For me, I would pick the CGI series or the model series.
Nice of him.
Which one would you pick?
Oh,
I would rather pick I think the original series.
You're right.
The Railway series?
And that's just it.
No, I mean the model series.
I tried so hard to
Oh,
give
okay.
perfect engine. I really did.
Yeah, I picked the
But
model
even
series
when
as
I'm
well.
I still
Even though
managed to mess up.
even though they didn't not good at the end.
This whole time, Gordon was right from the start.
I don't know which one he picked. I think all of them, or he. I actually don't know. Maybe he picked all of them.
It doesn't exist. No one's perfect.
And
We
here's
all
a
make
fun
mistakes.
fact. The
We all face them.
episode Kevin
We
the
all have
Steamy
flaws.
in the original storyboard,
Believe it or not,
Handel,
I
Peter,
really
Sam,
impatient
and
myself.
Two were going to be in it.
You? Oh, yes.
Okay.
I hate being tardy. You remember that day when they finally let me out of the shed again? I was so eager to work that I hurried the poor guard. Oh, where is that guard? Aren't we ever going to
Can I skip this?
down? Would that...
Good, Thomas, or realism?
Alright, so it was peak actually.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't know which one he picked, for me, I would say the model series or the railway series.
Yeah, and yeah, do you think we have a time to do something else, like I
Yeah.
don't know, play Roblox or something?
Yeah, I might end the stream right here, so you could join the next stream. So,
Oh,
bye
bye
everyone.
me.
All right,
All
bye
right.
everyone. All right, bye
Bye-bye.
guys.